The words didn't feel real, not when they were coming from his mouth, not when he was standing in the doorway of the very house I helped him buy, his face red, voice sharp, pointing toward the sidewalk like I was some intruder. "You're poisoning our marriage, get out!" I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stood there, numb, one hand still resting on the back of the couch, like maybe if I held onto something steady enough, the world would stop spinning. Behind him, Tanya stood, arms crossed, that same smug tilt to her chin she always had when she knew she'd won. Her lips pressed together, but not in shock. No, she wasn't surprised. She was satisfied. I looked down. My overnight bag, already packed, sat neatly by the front door. So they had planned this. I hadn't even said a word yet, hadn't even shown him the reason I came. I took a breath, one of those deep, aching kinds that make your ribs hurt, and I picked up the bag. No one offered to help. No one stepped forward. Not my son, not the boy I carried through storms and scraped knees, through late-night fevers and broken hearts. "I raised you better than this," I said quietly as I turned. He didn't answer. The door closed behind me with a soft click. That was the worst part, maybe, that it wasn't slammed, that it was closed, gently, deliberately. I sat on the curb for a moment, unsure where to go next. The folder of papers still rested in my purse, the ones I had planned to show him, the ones that proved everything. But now, I wasn't sure if it even mattered. Because Ethan hadn't just chosen Tanya today. He had rehearsed this choice. He had prepared for this moment. And I had walked right into it, carrying every ounce of love a mother can hold, and not a single drop left for herself. He said I was poisoning his marriage, but the real venom had already sunk its fangs long before I knocked on that door. There wasn't a day in my life when Ethan wasn't at the center of it. When my husband died, Ethan was just 6 years old, too young to understand why his daddy wouldn't come home again, too young to carry the weight he eventually would. But I promised myself that day I would carry enough for the both of us. I worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at the diner and evening janitorial work at the local high school. I'd come home just in time to help him with homework, throw together a quick dinner, and tuck him in with whatever energy I had left. I remember his tiny hands clutching mine, whispering, "Don't let go." "I won't," I'd whisper back. "Never." He was bright, kind, sensitive. The kind of boy who hugged you tightly in public and didn't care what anyone thought. Teachers adored him. The neighbors always said he'd grow up into something special. And I believed them. I gave up everything so he could build a future. I skipped buying new shoes for years to keep up with his piano lessons. I cashed in a small inheritance just to make his college deposit on time. And when he got that degree and walked across the stage in his cap and gown, I clapped so hard I thought my palms would bleed. Then came Tanya. He met her during his internship. She was beautiful, polished, with a voice that sounded like a soft warning bell, even when she smiled. Ethan brought her home one Thanksgiving, and the moment I saw the way she looked at me, like she was trying to read the warning label on a box, I knew. I couldn't explain it. I just felt it. She was polite, yes. Too polite. Not warm, not real. She called me Maureen, never Mum, even after they got engaged. I chalked it up to nerves at first, to unfamiliarity. But now I wonder, was that the beginning of her quiet campaign? When they announced their engagement, I hugged them both, even though something in me clenched tight. Ethan beamed with pride. He told me, "She gets me, Mum. She listens. She wants what's best for us." And all I could think was, I had spent a lifetime giving him what was best, but suddenly my best wasn't good enough. At first, it was little things, so subtle they were easy to overlook. Tanya started calling less when Ethan was at work. If I asked about him, she'd say, "He's busy. He has a lot on his plate." The warmth in her voice never matched the words. I'd call again the next day. Same response. After a while, she stopped answering altogether. When I mentioned it to Ethan, he chuckled and said, "Tanya's just not a phone person, Mum. Don't overthink it." So I didn't. I tried to trust her. Then came the cancelled visits. I'd offer to stop by after church with some food. Tanya would say they were out, or that they had plans she'd forgotten to mention. One time I dropped off Ethan's favourite homemade pot roast, left it on the porch with a little note. It stayed there overnight. The next morning, it was in the trash, still sealed. It stung, but I let it go. Tanya had a way of making me feel like an inconvenience, even while smiling. "That's sweet," she'd say when I brought gifts. But her eyes said something else, like she was tolerating me, like she wanted me to see myself out. Ethan, though, he changed slowly, subtly. He started parroting her language. He told me I should text before calling, that I should respect boundaries. I asked what boundaries I'd crossed, and he said, "It's not personal, Mum. Tanya just needs space." Space. That word became their shield. I was always invading it, it seemed. On one of the few dinners I was still invited to, Tanya told a story about her mother and smiled fondly. "She's my best friend," she said. I glanced at Ethan. He didn't look at me. I laughed lightly and said, "Well, I must have done something right raising you." Tanya responded, "Ethan's doing the real work now. We're building our own family." The shift was complete. I wasn't part of the we anymore. I was quietly being placed outside the circle I had spent my life creating. And worst of all, my son didn't even notice. Or maybe he did, and he let it happen anyway. When Ethan and Tanya started house hunting, I was thrilled. He called me after every open house, sending pictures, asking for advice. "I want your opinion, Mum. You always know what to look for," he'd say. And I'd drop everything just to help. They finally settled on a charming 2-story with a small front porch and a yard just big enough for the kids they hadn't had yet. But there was a problem. It was out of their budget. Ethan sounded defeated when he called me that evening. "It's perfect," he said, "but we're short. Even with Tanya's parents pitching in, we're still behind." I didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" I had a small savings, money I'd been keeping aside for emergencies, maybe for travel one day, or to finally fix that leaky roof on my own place. But what's a dream compared to your child's future? I wired the money the same week. I even went with Ethan to the meeting at the mortgage office. My name was placed on the deed alongside theirs. "I didn't ask for it," Ethan insisted. "You helped make this possible. It's only fair." For a moment, I felt like I belonged again. But the day they moved in, Tanya barely acknowledged me. She was polite, distant. Her parents stood in the kitchen like they owned the place. When I set a small potted plant by the front door, a simple housewarming gesture, Tanya glanced at it, forced a smile, and said, "Oh, that's cute." I noticed later it had been moved behind the house, forgotten. A few weeks after the move, Tanya brought up the deed, casually, over coffee. "It might be cleaner," she said, "if the house were just under our names. Legally simpler. You know, for taxes." I blinked. "But my name's already on it," she smiled. "Exactly. Which makes things complicated." Ethan said nothing, just looked at his phone. I didn't want to cause tension, so I let it go that day. But a seed of unease had been planted. They never mentioned it again. But neither did I. I should have. I should have asked questions, pressed back, fought harder. Because what I didn't know was that behind my back, Tanya wasn't just planning a future with my son. She was quietly cutting me out of it. I wasn't meant to hear it. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I had stopped by with a lasagna dish, Ethan's favourite. Tanya had mentioned they'd be out, but I saw Ethan's car in the driveway and figured maybe plans had changed. I knocked. No answer. I was about to leave the dish on the porch when I heard voices inside, just beyond the window cracked open slightly above the sink. "She's always dropping by," Tanya said. Her voice edged with frustration. "Why does she always need something?" Ethan replied, "She's just being her. She doesn't mean anything by it." "No, Ethan. She drops off food. She wants to talk every other day. She hovers. She makes me feel like a guest in my own home." There was a silence. Then Tanya added, "It's exhausting. She doesn't respect boundaries." My heart dropped. I stepped back quietly, placed the lasagna on the porch with a note, no longer one of warmth, but of silence, and left before they could see me. I drove home with my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That night, I didn't call him. For the first time in years, I didn't text to say good night. I stayed quiet, and the silence became a habit. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing a shift in Ethan's tone too. One evening, when I called just to check in, he sighed heavily and said, "Mum, I love you, but not everything needs a phone call. Sometimes it's just too much, too much." That word clung to me. I was too much, too present, too loud, too motherly. Soon after, Tanya started hosting more family events, but her family, not mine. I was invited to fewer and fewer dinners. When I did attend, I was treated like someone they were obligated to tolerate. My words were met with polite smiles. Conversations shifted the moment I spoke. The final blow came on their daughter's birthday. I arrived with a gift I had spent weeks knitting, a little cardigan in her favorite color. But when she opened it, she barely glanced at it before running to show Tanya's mother her new toy. Then I heard it. "Grandma, look!" She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to Tanya's mother. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own bloodline. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, cardigan still clutched in my lap, untouched by the child I once rocked to sleep when Tanya was recovering in the hospital. I stared at the folded yarn and wondered, when did I stop being seen? Not just seen, but respected, loved, heard. I didn't cry that night, not because it didn't hurt, but because the tears had dried somewhere between the birthday cake and the name Grandma, spoken for someone else. I began pulling back. I stopped calling unless it was necessary. I stopped dropping by, even if I baked something Ethan used to beg me to make. I told myself I was giving them space, but the truth? I was waiting to see if anyone would notice my absence. They didn't. Instead, Tanya filled the gaps I left behind. She sent Ethan thoughtful reminders, told him how tired he looked. "You've got too much on your plate, baby," I overheard her once whisper when I called, and she thought she had muted the phone. "Your mum doesn't understand how hard it is for us now." That us had a border, and I wasn't within it. Then Ethan started talking differently. "You always act like you know better. You bring tension when you visit. Tanya's uncomfortable when you question her decisions." At first I was confused. I had never raised my voice, never pushed, never interfered. But Tanya, she was good, clever, in a quiet, surgical way. She didn't lie outright. She reframed, planted ideas, made me look overbearing, manipulative, emotional. And Ethan, my sweet, intelligent boy, he was beginning to see me through her eyes, not as his mother, but as a threat. That was when I began documenting things. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but because some part of me still believed he'd see the truth, if I ever had to show it to him. I kept every message, every voicemail where Tanya asked me not to come, every email she sent regarding the house. I began collecting what I once ignored, because silence had become my strategy. But knowledge was becoming my armor. I didn't want a war, but I knew one was coming. It was a Wednesday afternoon, quiet, ordinary, unassuming. I was folding laundry when my old friend Margaret, who worked at the local county clerk's office, called me out of the blue. "Maureen," she said, her voice cautious, "I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I saw something strange." My heart clenched. "What kind of strange?" She hesitated. "Tanya filed a quitclaim deed last week. It removes your name from the house title. I froze. That can't be right, I said, standing there with a towel still half folded in my hands. I never signed anything. That's the thing, Margaret whispered. Your signature's on it. It felt like the room tilted. I sat down slowly, towel forgotten, a quitclaim deed. That meant someone had filed paperwork claiming I was giving up my legal interest in the house, and someone, had forged my name. I thanked her and hung up, then stared at the wall in silence for what felt like hours. When I finally found the document online, my stomach turned. There it was. A neat, looping signature. My name. Only, it wasn't my hand. The loops were off, the curve of the M too stiff. Whoever signed it had practiced, but not enough. I felt sick. The date on the document, the same weekend I'd been recovering from a bad case of bronchitis. I'd been in bed, barely able to sit up, let alone sign legal documents. Tanya had filed it, not Ethan, but I knew she didn't act alone. He must have seen it. Or worse, he agreed to it. And there was more. Attached to the filing was a statement of declaration, a paragraph of legalese that described me as emotionally unpredictable and not in sound mind to maintain ownership rights. I stared at those words for so long they blurred on the screen. That's how they saw me. That's what they said behind closed doors. Not loving, not generous, but unstable. A liability. An inconvenience to be cleared out of the way, quietly. That night, I printed every page and placed them in a folder. It wasn't about the house anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about the truth, and whether my son still had any place left in his heart for it. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse my words. I simply packed the folder into my handbag, slipped on my coat, and walked out the door. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask for permission. I just knew that if I gave them time, they'd find a way to twist things again. This time, I wanted the truth to be the one surprise they couldn't rewrite. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the front lawn. Ethan answered the door. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation in a flash. Tanya was behind him again, always behind him, like a hand on his shoulder, invisible and possessive. "Mum, you should have called," Ethan said flatly. "I won't stay long," I replied, calm but firm. "I just need to talk to you. Alone." Tanya stepped forward immediately. "There's nothing to talk about. You've been overstepping for months." I looked at her, and for once, I didn't look away. "I'm not speaking to you." Ethan tensed. "Don't talk to her like that." The words struck deep, but I kept my composure. "I came to show you something," I said, pulling the folder from my bag. "It concerns the house, and my name. Or rather the fact that it's been removed without my knowledge." Tanya's eyes flickered. A small shift, almost imperceptible. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this," I said, handing him the papers. He opened the folder, glanced at the documents, and grew pale. Page after page, he read in silence. His brows furrowed, his lips tightened. Finally, he looked up. This says you signed a quitclaim." "I didn't," I said evenly. "That's not my signature, and the statement attached calls me emotionally unstable." Tanya interjected quickly. "That's a misunderstanding?" "No," I cut in, louder than I intended. "It's fraud." Ethan looked between us, his voice rising. "You're trying to drive a wedge between us." And that's when it happened, the words I'd dreaded, the final crack in whatever bond we had left. "You're poisoning our marriage. Get out!" He yelled it, loud, final, without hesitation. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I came to protect you," I whispered, "not fight her." And then I turned and walked away from the boy I once believed would never stop needing his mother. I didn't cry on the walk to the car. I didn't look back either, not even once. But my hands trembled when I placed the folder back into my purse. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew. That moment at the door wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end. Still, I wasn't done. That night, I made an appointment with a lawyer, not to sue, not yet, but to protect what was left, to understand what Tanya had done and how deep it went. The forgery alone was enough to press charges. But the lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Delia, told me gently, "You don't have to swing the hammer yet, but you do need to hold it in your hand." She helped me file a notice of dispute on the deed, gathered the necessary evidence. The handwriting expert I'd hired confirmed it wasn't mine. We had everything. 2 weeks later, I mailed Ethan a packet, neatly organized, professionally bound. A summary of everything: the forged signature, the false declaration, the dates Tanya had filed, and a notarized affidavit of my mental and physical health from my doctor. I didn't include a letter. I let the papers speak for themselves. He didn't respond. But I know he read them, because 3 days later he showed up outside my door. His face looked like it had aged 5 years. Hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. A man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Why?" was all he asked. "You tell me," I said. He started pacing. "She told me it was a technical issue, that you wanted off the deed, that it was your idea. She said you were tired and didn't want the responsibility anymore. She told me you were slipping." Did I look like I was slipping when I raised you? When I gave you every dollar I had for that house? He didn't answer. His shoulders sank. I stepped out onto the porch and handed him one final document. "Here, this is the last thing I'll give you. It's a cease and desist. You or Tanya so much as touch my name on another paper without consent. And the next thing you'll receive is a court summons." His voice cracked. "Mum," but it was too late. I wasn't asking for understanding anymore. I was demanding respect. He stood there, holding the papers like they were made of fire, burning through whatever illusions were left between us. I waited. For an apology. For tears. For even a flicker of the boy I once raised. But all I saw was confusion. Shame, maybe, but too tangled in pride to reach me. "I didn't know," he whispered. "No," I said, voice quiet. "You chose not to know. There's a difference. Because it wasn't just the paperwork. It wasn't just Tanya. It was every moment he looked away while I was being erased. Every time he watched her twist the truth and decided silence was easier than confrontation. "I need time to make this right," he said. I gave a small nod. "Take all the time you need. But understand this. There are some doors that don't reopen." He started to cry, but I didn't move. I didn't comfort him. I didn't wrap him in my arms like I used to when he scraped his knee or woke up from a nightmare. Because now, he was someone else's boy. Someone who let another woman rewrite his history, erase his mother, and call it marriage. He left without another word. And I sat alone in my quiet house. No noise, no calls, no visitors. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I changed the locks on my front door. I updated my will. I removed his name from everything. Not out of spite, but for protection. Because love doesn't mean letting yourself be used. And motherhood doesn't mean sacrificing yourself over and over just to be handed back a silence you never earned. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from him. No calls, no texts, no Tanya. And that silence, it was no longer a wound. It was the sound of dignity, of finally choosing myself. It was nearly 4 months later when the phone finally rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, and for a moment I debated whether I should answer, but something in my chest tightened. An old instinct I hadn't yet learned how to silence. I picked up. "Mum?" His voice was thinner now, older, like life had worn down the edges I used to smooth for him. I didn't say anything. "Tanya's gone," he said after a long pause. "She left." I sat back in my chair, letting the words settle like dust. Not with triumph, not even relief. Just quiet understanding. I'd seen it coming. I'd known it would happen eventually. "She moved out 2 weeks ago," he continued. Took the kids, filed for divorce. Still, I didn't speak. I knew if I did, the dam might break, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to gather all the pieces again. She said she didn't want to live with someone who let their mother come between them. He gave a sad, bitter laugh. Can you believe that? Yes, I could. Tanya was never building a marriage. She was building control, and the moment she didn't need Ethan to prove anything, she let it all burn. I'm sorry, he said, voice thick with something that might have been genuine now. I should have believed you. I should have asked more questions. You should have listened, I said quietly, not angry, not cruel, just true. I was scared to lose her, he confessed, but I lost you instead. I didn't tell him he hadn't lost me, because maybe in some ways he had, not entirely, not permanently, but something had cracked too deep to pretend it never happened. He asked if he could come see me, said he needed to apologize in person. I told him I was open to that. But I warned him, this house has new locks, not just on the door, on my heart too. So if you come here, come with truth, come with humility, come knowing that forgiveness isn't free. It's earned. He was silent. I understand, he said at last. I hung up gently, then sat there staring at the wall, wondering whether regret could ever build a bridge wide enough to carry two people back across the years of silence between them. He never did come that week. He sent flowers once, a card with no signature, just the word, always, and I left it in the mailbox. Let the rain take it. Because the truth is, some wounds don't bleed. They harden, quietly. And not every apology is meant to be received the way it was intended. Some are just the echo of a door that stayed closed too long. I didn't stop living. I repainted the kitchen, gave the garden a new life, planted lavender by the fence. Tanya once said she was allergic. That thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. Neighbors came by more. I even joined the local book club again. They asked about Ethan sometimes. I just said, he's busy with life, because the truth didn't need to be offered to everyone. It belonged to me now. Some nights, I still look at old photo albums. There's a picture of Ethan at 8 years old, wearing a paper crown at his birthday party, cake on his cheeks. He had reached out with both arms, yelling, "Mama, look!" I remember that moment vividly. He used to think I hung the stars. I keep that photo, not to remember what I lost, but to remind myself that I did raise a good boy once, and that the woman I was back then, she still exists, just wiser, stronger, less willing to shrink to fit in someone else's story. Sometimes, people ask if I've forgiven him. I say this: forgiveness isn't the same as reunion. I forgave him the moment I realized I didn't deserve what he did. But I don't owe him my closeness. I owe me my peace. And now, I live in that peace. Not because I walked away from my son, but because I finally walked toward myself. So when people say, he chose his wife over you, I just smile and say, I chose the truth over both of them, because in the end, I wasn't poison, I was the root. And even roots know when to stop growing, when the soil turns cold.